indicated are the sailors, seafarers, the people of the Isles. The Isles of the Gentiles general. X might be rendered in Egyptian by the Isles of the Amu or Hemu. The hieroglyphic, Hem, is the sign of a water frontier. The word, Rut, has various meanings, all significant when applied to the Egyptians by themselves. Rut is to retain the form, be carved in stone, a footstool, or a pair of feet, cause to do, plant, grow, repeat. One hieroglyphic sign of Rut is an implement for pegging down and making fast in the earth, to retain animals in one spot. This is symbolic of the Rut as the people who dwelt where they first laid hold and made fast to the earth. These are the Egyptians themselves. They claim to be the root of the race of men or the Rut, the men, knowing of no other point of departure, and being so ancient they have forgotten that their complexion was at one time Bijak. The word passed into Sanskrit as Reta, produced from the seed, and their likeness was the lotus, which contains the seed within itself, and retains the name of the Rut or Reta. The name of the Rudi went out into other lands as that of the Rudin, upper and lower, and the Ludim. It had become a typical name of race, long lineage and enduring life in the Assyrian Politu Pa, is the Egyptian masculine article, the Latins, the various Luds, the Lithuanians, and others who fastened themselves firmly and took root elsewhere. The Egyptians were and are the true Rut, the one primordial people who first took conscious hold of the earth and retained a knowledge of the fact. The land of Egypt is the footstool, Rut the people were the feet Rut on which the human being first arose erect to attain its full stature. Incidentally, however, we learn that the Egyptians being first arose erect to attain its full stature. Incidentally, however, we learn that the Egyptians recognized the black race to be the first of created men. The people of Ra are born of the Great One who is in the heavens. The Rut are born of his eye in their persons of superior men. He also created the Amu and the Tamamu. Further, he has comforted himself with a multitude who came from him in the shape of Negroes, but it is expressly said, Horns has created them in he 28a book of the Beginnings. Defends their souls. 1. This may be followed mythologically. Har is older than Ra. His type goes back to Suthar, and Sutnam the Negro god who created the Nashi. It has been overlooked that the Egyptians do possibly tell us something of their own origin beyond the Rudi of the monuments. We learn from Sinchelas Chronicon, Li, and Eusebius Croce, B, that among the Egyptians there was a certain tablet called the Old Chronicle, containing 30 dynasties and 113 descents, during the long period of 36,525 years. The first series of princes was that of the Orete, the second was that of the Mestraians, the third of the Egyptians. 2. The first divine name in the series is one that is earlier than the sun, given through the Greek as Hephaestus, to whom no time is assigned, because this deity was apparent both by night and day. This contains matter of great moment not yet read nor readable until we have seen more of Egypt's mythology. The present point is that the Orete princes coincide with the reign of Hephaestus as the beginning. The Orete are of course the Rudi of monumental Egypt, the typical name of the race of men par excellence. But the prefixta will add something to our knowledge of the pre-monumental Rut. O in Egyptian means the oldest, the primordial. The word O is the Egyptian, was, and the O Rut means the race that was, the first and oldest race of men. O is a modified form of AF. Both O and AF signify born of. The name of Africa is derived from this root AF or O. The tongue of Egypt tells us that AF Rui Ka is the inner land, born of, literally the birthplace. They knew of no other. Thus the Orete were the AF Rete, people of the birthplace in Africa. But AF in Egyptian has a still earlier form in Kaf, and the Afrite become the primordial Kaf Rete. The Kafirs have preserved the primal shape of the word signifying the first, the embryotic, aboriginal root race of men. The Kafirs likewise keep the true African color of the original Rudi or race. There is a sort of pre-Darwinianism in this root Kaf, the name of the Kafir and the Kafrite of Egypt. The Kaf is the symbolical monkey, the cynocephalus. It is apparent from the drawing of the nose of the figures of Tort 3 that the Kaf enters into her compound character with the hippopotamus and crocodile. Not that the Kafirs and Kafrite named themselves from the ape or as the ape-like, or as the beings evolved from the ape. But they were the first, and the name signifies the first, and when the primitive men had advanced and took other names, the prior name was left to the primordial men, the pre-men, so to say, and it remained with the ape and the aborigine. This will help to explain the ape men and monkey men of various tribes. 1 Records of the Past, X. 109-10. 2 Syncellus, Chronicon, Lee. Eusebius, Chron. B. 3 Wilk. Pi. 32, Figs. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Egypt. 29. Who retained the earlier status in their names which mixed up the pre-men and apes. So the Assyrian name of the monkey, Udumu, is identical with the Hebrew name Adam for man. The laws of language prove that the Orate, the first princes of this long line of descent given at 36,525 years, were Kafrate. And the laws of evolution prove the primal race, so far as we can get back, to be the black people. The calf is the black, dog-headed, almost human monkey. Ape and calf are named as the first preceding man, and there was no other name known for the first than calf, AP, O or AP. The calf Rudy name has the same relation to the Rudy of the monuments that the ape, the pre-man, has to man. On another line of modification and development, the name Kafruti becomes Karuti, found on the monuments as Karut, natives, autochthones, indigenous inhabitants, also applied to masons, and workers in stone. The Karuti, it is suggested, became the Chaldi and the Keltae. Maspero thinks the Egyptians had lost the remembrance of their origin. But for the people who were the recorders and chronologers of mankind, that is good evidence of their having no foreign origin to forget. The Ruti were the race. The Orate were the oldest race. The Karuti were the natives, inhabitants, indigenes, aborigines, and there was nothing more to be said. They had slept the black skin of the Nashi and repudiated it, as we have denied the ape. Nevertheless, they came out of it as we do from the ape without remembering the fact, which has to be recollected in evidence. The first series of the princes was that of the Orate, the second was that of the Mestrans, the third of the Egyptians. This is a perfect panorama of the descent, geographical and ethnological. By aid of the Orate Kafruti name we ascend to the source whence the race that always was had descended. In Egyptian, Mest means the birthplace, the lying in chamber, to whelp, be born. Mest is the black as the name of coal or stibium. Ru is the gate or gorge of outlet, Ruan the gorge of a valley. The Mestrans are the people of the outlet of the birthplace in the stage next to the Orate. The Egyptian Mest, to be born, whelped, answers to the Hebrew to become a parent, to exist, the very first form of to be, the parallel with O. And the Mestrans are the people of the gorge, the place of outlet, the same that we derived from Mitzrayim as the dual land of the outlet from the birthplace, and as Mest means stibium, the Mestrans were apparently black. It is in Egyptian alone that Mes for birth is the equivalent of Mest, and Mesru the outlet of birth of Mestru, whence Mestrayan. Now one of the Hindu names of Egypt is Mizristan. But the Sanskrit Mizra, mixing, does not contain the primary meaning, and the word is supposed to be taken from a lost root which it is here suggested may be the Egyptian Mes, generation and birth. The sense of mixing 30a Book of the Beginnings applies to generating. Also, a strait has a likeness to Mestru, the road or strait, issuing from the birthplace. In the Old Chronicle the Mestrans are placed midway, corresponding to the meaning of Mestru on the outlet from the place of birth, the human lair, Mestru in the gorge from the birthplace, and the Mestru Mitzert we may identify with the country below the first cataract, because at Khartoum and Assoan the inundation was born. Kart signifies the child, to perceive, and it was there the birth of the child was first perceived. This adds another sense to the words Mestruan and Mitzrayim as the birthplace of the inundation. Assoan says Mary at 1 inch always takes the traveler by surprise. We seem to be quite in a new world, Egypt finishes. Another country begins. The inhabitants of Khartoum especially are remarkable by their grand mien, their black skin, and their finely formed heads, that remind one of the best types of northern races. Here it may be seen that with a skin as black, although more lustrous with light, as that of any Negro of the West Coast, the African in Nubia at times attained a type of face, and a sculpture of form as noble and refined as any of the white skins of all the vaunted Caucasian and Aryan races. The line of the Mestrians may have begun hereabouts, leaving the Orate higher up in the old dark land where the prelingual beings clicked away, in equatorial Africa for many a myriad of years. So long ago that the primeval race can only be known by its radiance and its rootage, and not by any stem extant, so long ago that the Hottentot, the West Coast Negro, the Nubian and Egyptian are but concentrations of form and color along the lines diverging from a center out of sight in the far land of the Orate. Herodotus too says the oracle of Amen pronounced all those who drank the water of the Nile and dwelt north of Elephantine to be Egyptians. They were so in later times when Egypt was both upper and lower, but the name of Ket for Egypt belongs especially to the lower land in the north. The Egyptians, the people of Ket, come last. They dwelt in the delta. 3 stages are here distinctly marked. The place of the Orate above the cataracts, that of the Mestrians in the Ruan, the gorge of the valley, and the Egyptians in Ket or Lower Egypt, called the Delta, and the name of the Delta, Ter-Ta, also shows the descent from above, for Ter-Del in Egyptian means the extreme limit, the foot, that which ends and completes the whole, and Ta is the land. The Orate of this passage, then, are not gods nor are the Mestrians demigods, as they have been misrendered. Bunsen assumed that the chronicle was fictitious, and asserted that the number of 36,525 years represents the great year of the world. 3. It does nothing of the kind. 1. Monuments of Upper Egypt, pp. 255-6. 2b. E. 18. 3. Egypt's Place, Volume I. p. 215. Egypt. 3i. The only great year of the world is that of precession, 25,868 solar years, and the 25 zodiac cycles 25x 1461, or 36,525 years do not make any great year whatever. When we read in the Syncellus that Manetho, the high priest of the Egyptian idols, wrote a fabulous work on Sothis under Philadelphus, that means a book containing what the man uninstructed except in biblical chronology considered mythological, not necessarily a forgery of time reckonings, for he denied their chronological nature in toto. Jamblichus, in his work on the mysteries, mentions the number of 36,500 books assigned to Tot, and this agrees very nearly with the number of years given in the Old Chronicle. This also is denounced by Bunsen as being nothing more than the year of the world in 25 zodiac cycles. The question of interest here is whether these 25 zodiac cycles had been observed and registered. If so, the records were sure to be entitled the Books of Tot, the earliest forms of which were columns called stelae. The figure of these is yet extant in our flat round-topped gravestones. Syncellus describes Manetho as having declared that certain of these stelae still existing in the Syriatic land were his authorities. They were engraved in hieroglyphics and in the sacred tongue, and, after the flood, they were transcribed into Greek in hieroglyphical characters. These columns, or stelae, in the Syriatic land are referred to by Josephus. 1. He ascribes them to Seth, and says they were erected to record the peculiar sort of wisdom which concerns the heavenly bodies, that is as chronological tablets, because Adam had predicted that the world was to be at one time destroyed by fire, at another by flood. Plato, in the opening of his Timaeus, refers to these so-called antediluvian columns, or stelae, of the Syriatic land. They are likewise mentioned in the Fragments of Hermes, in Stobaeus. The Syriatic land has been accepted unquestioningly as the land of Syria. This in Egyptian is Karua. But there is Karua north and Karua south, and the country of the stelae is the southern Karua, the Althiopic country. Now here is a fact unknown to the Greeks, Christians, or Josephus, and one sure not to be recorded by Manetho. We learn from a statement in the Book of the Dead that Tot, the recorder of the gods, was otherwise Sut, who had preceded Tot in the character of the scribe. How this was so remains to be unraveled. Enough for the present to say that it was so, and to refer here to the fact that the stelae assigned to Tot by Manetho are ascribed to Sut by Josephus, both describing them as standing in the Syriatic land, which we identify with Karua in the south. The Karuans are extant on the monuments as a black people. In both accounts we find the flood. But the monuments of the chronologers of mankind know nothing of the Noachian deluge. The flood of Egypt is the inundation of the Nile. And these antediluvian stelae in the Karuan land before the flood we 1 Ant. B. I. Ch. 2. 32a Book of the Beginnings. take to have stood in the Kaarouan country above the cataracts and the land made by the inundation. The account thus rendered is that a vast pre-monumental period of the Egyptians was represented by the princes of the Orete, the ancient and original race under the divine reign of Hephaestus before the time of Ra, and that the stelae upon which the time was inscribed were set up in the Kaarouan land beyond the cataracts or the flood, and that as the old dark people came down into the lower parts of the Nile Valley to be known as the children of Ham, the Black, Mizraim, Cush, and Phut, and the still later Egyptus, they inscribed the same facts on the papyrus in what has been misinterpreted to be the tongue of the Achaean Greeks. Syriatic, then is Kaarouatic, and we have to look for the Kaaroua South, the land of Sut Anubis, who was earlier than taught as the divine registrar. Some of the inscriptions of the time of Thutmose III designate the country of Karu or Kalu, in the far south, as the southern boundary. Brugish considers this to be the ancient Kalo, which, according to Ptolemy, was situated on the 4th degree, 15 minutes, of north latitude in those countries. Ka, e.g., is an interior region or it may be high land, and Rua is the outlet, the place of exit. Karua is also an Egyptian name for a lake, so that the name might mean the lake country. It is noticeable that the true country of the stelae and the rock inscriptions is sharply defined by the first cataract. In the route from Assuan to Philae the rock inscriptions abound on all sides. Shale, a small island in the cataract, is covered with such records, some of which have yielded a clue to historical facts. One is it was obviously intended they should do, for the name in Egyptian, Red Ska Rui, signifies the island of the writings or inscriptions. One cannot but suppose the rocks in the upper country may still preserve some memorials of the remoter past. The account appears to mean that the stelae were erected in the time of Sut Anubis, the first registrar of the gods, and the contents were afterwards transcribed in hieroglyphics and preserved in the Hermene writings assigned to Tot. The Egyptians, says Horapollo I. 21, depict 3 water pots and neither more nor less, because, according to them, there is a triple cause of the inundation. One of these causes, he tells us, is the rain which prevails in southern Africa. He further observes, they make the water pot like a heart having a tongue, because the heart is the ruling member of the body as the Nile is of Egypt, and they call it the producer of existence. The tongue, as he calls it, of the 3 vases, is the sign of the pouring out the libation. There are 2 tongues or volumes of water answering to the blue and red Nile, and these issue from the 3 vases, the triple heart. The vases are 3, and we may now fairly infer that this triple symbol with its dual stream, was intended to connect the source of the Nile with the 1 Marriott, Monuments of Upper Egypt, p. 259. Egypt. 33. 3 Great Lakes in Equatorial Africa. It has been rediscovered that the river is fed by 2 of them, and Tanganyika may easily have been classed with the system. The fact of their existence was known already to the travelers and map makers of some centuries ago. The maps of the Arabs in the 12th and 13th centuries, the Portuguese of the 16th and 17th centuries, and the Dutch map of the 17th century, show that at least 3 Great Lakes were known. It now becomes probable that the triple source and fountainhead of the Nile was known to the Egyptians many thousand years since, and that the fact is stereotyped in the triple ideograph of the inundation. Professor Oppert assures us from his standpoint, that in all cases we may take for granted that the date of 1512 BC, given in his version of the Barosian chronology, reposes on a real historical tradition, and that the 2 periods, the Chaldean Moon period and the Sothiac period, whether it was Egyptian or not, have the same origin. Professor Oppert, by mathematical calculation, fixes the date of a double phenomenon which struck the sight of men, consisting in an eclipse and in an apparition of Sirius, on Tuesday the 27th of April, Julian, or the 28th of January, Gregorian. But as at this epoch Sirius was not visible to northern or middle Egypt, on account of the equinoctial precession, civilization must start from a more southern point. This, to say the truth, adds Professor Oppert, is a mere hypothesis, and he trusts that further investigation will either confirm or deny this special view of his. It is now about to be claimed that civilization did start from a more southern point than mid-Egypt. For Egyptian, Hebrew, and Greek, there was nothing visible beyond Egypt but the background of blackness in Africa, the land of Ham, the source from which she was fed in secret by tributaries that flowed as stealthily as the hidden fountains of the Nile. The Hebrew scriptures, among their other fragments of ancient lore, are very emphatic in deriving the line of Mitzrayim from Ham or Cam, the black type coupled with Cush, another form of the black. They give no countenance to the theory of Asiatic origin for the Egyptians. In the biblical account of the generations of Noah, Mitzrayim is the son of Ham, i.e. of Cam, the black race. Thus Ham occupies the place of the Orite princes of the Old Chronicle at the head of the Egyptians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. This account, preserved in the 10th chapter of Genesis, could only have been kept by the black race, the blameless Karen Ethiopians, and Egyptians as contemporaries of the early time, and recorded in the Hermine books, fragments of which are found in the Hebrew writings. Egypt, mother of men, and firstborn of mortals, the learned Apollonius Rhodius in the Argonautica calls that country. 1 in the 259. Volume I. D34a Book of the Beginnings. Time of Xerxes, Hippies of Rhegium designated the Egyptians the most ancient of all nations. 1 inch for my part, says Herodotus, I am not of opinion that the Egyptians commenced their existence with the country called the Delta, but that they always were since men have been. And that as the soil gradually increased many of them remained in their former abodes, and many came lower down. For anciently Thebes was called Egypt. 2 He also tells us that the Egyptians, before the reign of Psammetichus, considered themselves to be the most ancient of mankind. 3 We see, by the Greek report, the Egyptians knew that Egypt was once all sea or water. Herodotus says the whole of Egypt, except the province of Thebes, was an extended marsh. No part of that which is now situate beyond the Lake Moeris was to be seen, the distance between which lake and the sea is a journey of 7 days. 4 Plutarch also says Egypt was at one time sea. Diodorus Siculus affirms that in primitive times, that which was Egypt when he wrote, was said to have been not a country, but one universal sea. 5 A persistent Greek tradition asserts that the primitive abode of the Egyptians was in Karen, Ethiopia, and mention is made of an ancient city of Meroe, from which issued a priesthood. Ho were the founders of the Egyptian civilization. Meroe, or in Egyptian Muru, means the maternal outlet, therefore the birthplace, which was typified by the Mount Muru. The modernized form of Muru or Meroe is Balua. Barua e.g. also yields the place of outlet. And this place may be pursued according to the African naming up to the Rua Mountains and the outlets of the lakes. The Hebrew tradition manifestly derives the Egyptians from above and not from Lower Egypt. I will bring again the captivity of Egypt, and will cause them to return into the land of Pathros, into the land of their habitation. Ezek. XXIX. 14. Puthras Delins is obviously derived from the Egyptian, in which Rus is the south, southern. Pet is the name of the crib or birthplace. Puth Heb denotes the opening, the place of birth. Put an apt e.g. interchange, after apt being the abode and the name of the goddess, the oldest great mother. Pet or Peth is the earlier Beth, and Pathros is the birthplace in the south. Patoris, as the south country, Upper Egypt. In the Hebrew writings Ethiopia, Cush, and Zaba are convertible terms for the same country, the Egypt beyond Egypt. Zaba, the firstborn son of Cush, is mentioned with Cush and Mitzrayim is Exli. 3 And the Zabians are coupled with Cush XLV. 14. The inhabitants of Meroe were called Zabaim Ez. XXIII. 42. The Zabines from the wilderness. Zaba, the modified form of Kaba, are kept, including the ancient Meroe, has been understood to mean the northern half of Ethiopia. 1 Skal. 2 Apal. IV. 262. 2b. E. 15. 3b. E. 2. 4b. E. 4. 5 Lib. 3. Egypt. 35. The Ethiopians are called Ipalt from the reduplicated P, Idip belonging to MP, a people of great might or double power is XVIII. 27. Kepha e.g. means force, puissance, potency. Kefti or Kepti is a reduplicated Kef equivalent to Kev Kev, and Kep Kep is an Egyptian name of Nubia. In Egyptian Keb, Cleft, or Kepish, is the north, as the Hindward part, the front being the south. The Kepish, equivalent of the Hebrew sealed Kabish, is the hieroglyphic hinder part, and the name of the Great Bear, as the constellation of the north. If the reader will think for a moment of the sight presented by the revolving Great Bear to those who watched it in equatorial lands, he will realize what an arresting image of the north this must have been with its settings and risings in that quarter to a people who did not know the earth was round. In the title of Psalm B, mention is made of the debris of Cush, and Debar Nan signifies the hinder part. It is the exact equivalent for the Egyptian Kepish. Zaba, as a name of Ethiopia, is the modified Kibar Kefa. Also in Egyptian Kefti, the north, the goddess of the north, was worn down to Uati or Ut, and in the time of the Middle Empire a hieroglyphic U passed into an E. Thus we have Ethiopia, Utiopia, Keftiopia, and Opia from a P is the first, the ancestral land. Cassiopeia, the lady of the seat, is the queen of Ethiopia or Cush, and her name, derived from Kus, to found, or earlier Kepish Pna, the seat, denotes the queen of the Opia, or Apia, in the north. Thus interpreted, Ethiopia is the first, the ancestral seat, in the north. This may be followed out. Ethiopia is claimed for the birthplace Kab means to give birth to. Kef is the one born of, the place we come out of. Af and O mean born of, and Uti signifies to emit. Amain, go or come out of, and Opia or Apia is the ancestral land. The diphthong E represents an earlier O and yet earlier Af, hence Ethiopia is Aptiopia or Keftiopia. Yerite is still the Welsh name of Egypt. In the celestial north was the mythical birthplace where the Great Mother Tort, the goddess of the Great Bear and 7 stars, was represented as the bringer forth from the waters in the shape of a hippopotamus, and when Cush, or Ethiopia, was named as the north, the hinder part, literally the hinder thigh, as a sign of the birthplace, it must have be. I by a people who were still farther south, as from no other direction can the naming be applied. Cush, Zaba, or Ethiopia, was once the north land to a people that dwelt above. The name would not be given by a people ascending the valley of the Nile and going due south. Whereas the name, once given high above Egypt, can be followed down to Coptus, thence to Ket in Lower Egypt, and then to Keft, the Egyptian name of Phoenicia. The birthplace was in the north, and the Egyptians identified that with Ethiopia. D236a Book of the Beginnings. A typical title of the Repa, prince, or heir apparent to the throne of Ra, was Prince of Ethiopia. Diodorus B. I tells of an annual Ethiopian festival at which the statues of the gods of Egypt, who were represented by Jupiter and Juno, were carried into the Ethiopian land, and then after a certain time of sojourn there they were brought back again to Egypt. Eustathius on Homer, one says the Ethiopians used to fetch the images of Zeus and other gods from the temple at Thebes, and with these they went about at a certain period in Libya and celebrated a splendid feast of 12 gods. This was going back to the ancient birthplace, the backward Ket, and the carriage of the later divinities to the old home, to celebrate a festival of the 12 gods, looks like a typical conquest of the earlier domain of the old mother Ket, the hippopotamus goddess who brought them forth. On this journey they were not following the celestial north, that lay directly opposite. The Libyans, be it remembered, wore the Horus lock of the Repa, the prince of Ethiopia, from whom perhaps they derived their name. A rock tablet in the neighborhood of the town of Assoan proclaims to the traveler that to Tatmes II. 1600 BC came the Asiatics and the Kushitaean, the nomads. His frontier to the south is at the summit of the world, and his frontier north at the farthest end of Asia, which places the southern limit of the land at the equator. This range southward was no doubt attained in the backward ascent from the lower lands after the Egyptians had become civilized there. Under the rule of Tatmes III, the southern boundary of the land was designated Apta, the horn point or tip-top of the land, the farthest point to the south. This Apta was a type name for the extremity of the land, and means equal or equatorial land. Also AP is first ancestral, aboriginal, and divine. Apta describes the land Ta, or type of all that is initial, primordial, first in being, place, or person. After Apt is the birthplace, the bringer forth, the genitrix of the gods and the equatorial land. The horn point of the world is known and named in Egyptian as Apta. Apt and Ket are two forms of the same word, as the name of the birthplace and the bringer forth. It may seem like considering the matter too curiously, and yet it would not be without warrant from phonetic law if we were to see in apta the modification of kepta as the secondary naming from the north, or, with the frontage reversed, to the primal naming of the north as ket, when that quarter was the front, and the namers were looking north. Ethiopia includes both apta and kepta, and the Great Mother, who was hippopotamus in front and crocodile behind, was both apt and kept. Kept also modifies into set. The ka sign of the crocodile's tail is a later saw. Set Sothis passes into Sut, the name of the south. Thus set and apt are both later forms of kept. The hinder part as the birthplace was first of all 1-2 1, Bede Smith's Classical Dictionary, Ethiopia. Egypt. 37. The region of the Great Bear that brought forth in the north. Then in the solar imagery the Egyptians depicted the heaven by the figure of a woman, whose body arched over the earth and rested on the hands and feet. In this position she brought forth the sun, animal fashion, at the place of the hinder thigh kepish, and her face was the front, the south. Egyptian shows that the north, as the lower, hinder, the night side, the lowermost, the dark part, was the first named, and the modification of the K into H reflects this fact, corresponding to kept and apt. Kak is darkness, and the deity of the dark. He and Way denote the light. Kek signifies the invisible of being. He the visibly manifested. Kar is the lower, Har the upper. Kept and Hut are tail and head. Kar is the first Horus, the child, immature and mortal Harpocrates. Har is the second, perfected, immortal. The word Kam is not a primary formation, and in Hebrew the vowel of a prior spelling is preserved. The word for Kam or Ham in Eupolemus is written din KVM, as in Hebrew Chush is written Dil Chavish. KVM is extant in Egyptian as Kebem or Kebma. The fuller form of the word is also indicated by Kam, i.e., KFM to create, whence the Kamite was the created race. One reduced form occurs in Kam KFM, for the black stone, obsidian, determined by the crocodile's tail. One in this carries us beyond the land of the inundation to that of the hippopotamus, whose name is Kebma, the mother of the waters, typified by the water cow. Kab is the name of the black hippopotamus in the Namaka Hottentot. Kab permutes with Kam in Hebrew for black. And the permutation probably depends on the word KVM or KVM dividing in twain to posit two forms. 2 Kam, then, has to be sought in Kebma, the place of Keb, or the mother Keb. This takes us back to Ethiopia, the land of Cush or Kavish, which, in the form of Kepish, is still the name of the Great Bear, or hippopotamus. The land of the black cob, the black calf, and the black kafir, the Kafruti, the black race of KVM, Kavish, and KVT, the children of Tort, the Typhonian genitrix. Etymologically we. 1 champ. Gram. P. 90. Tusa the Gothic Kavimai shows the earlier form of cum. The Welsh CWM implies a prior CFM. So the hieroglyphic, Pe, bifurcates into the P and H of the Szechuana and other languages. This, BM, found in Hebrew, may show the connecting link between the Egyptian kef, the hand, a figure of 5, and the supposed original Aryan word quem, for no. 5. Kef, kep and kem permute, as is now suggested, on account of a form in kafim, still found in on and in kebma. This abrades in Quern and Kamesh for no. 5. Taking kem is the equivalent of kep the hand, kemt kemti for no. 10 e.g. is the 2 hands. Kemsha e.g. would read hand the first, or 1 hand, and kem 2 hands. This is at a depth, however, that philology cannot bottom. It belongs to a primitive system of typology. For example, the first hand was the creative matrix, the kep in Egyptian. The old Kebma is the paunchy pot-bellied hippopotamus goddess, and the Hebrew J on for no. 5. The hand, also means the paunch, and paunch, or panch, is the type word for hand and no. 5 in other groups of languages. 38a Book of the Beginnings. Have the gradation of sounds from the F in Kaf, to the in Coptus, the B in Ket. Also we find the later Egyptians calling uncivilized and ignorant men the Kemrut. If we read this with a verses we recover the KHVM Ruti is the equivalent of Kafruti, the Orate, the Kardi, Kaldi, Kelte, and the final Ruti. It is noticeable that the Lapps call themselves the Savmi people, which is the word Kamma or CM in a later stage. The Japanese likewise claim to have descended from the Kami or Kafmi. Egyptian monumental history begins with the name of Mina or Menes. The chronology made out by different Egyptologists is variously recorded thus. Bunsen, 3623 B. C. Lepsius, 3892 greater than Loth, 4157 greater than Brugish, 4455 Unger, 5613 greater than Wybok, 5702 greater than Brugish. Bay makes use of the latest data, and also of the investigations of Lieblein into the pedigree of 25 court architects. He concludes that the year 4455 BC is about the nearest approximation that can be made to a correct date for the era of Mina. And, as nearly as can be calculated, the spring equinox first occurred in the sign of the bull, 4560 BC. The clue is worth following. The present writer refuses to be entangled in the maze and lost in the labyrinth of the dynastic lists. It may be there was no monarch of the name of Mina. No contemporary monument of his time has ever been found, nothing inscribed with his name, nothing is known to have been made, in the time of Mina. One tradition ascribes to him a dike which still exists in the neighborhood of Cairo. Personally, however, the writer does not doubt the existence of Mina, only if the man were removed the era would still remain. That era has been made out to be nearly coincident with the time when the Kalur of the spring equinox entered the sign of the bull. The name of Mina is identical with that of the bull Menevis or Men-Apis, of Heliopolis, the celestial birthplace of the sun. This apparently perilous subject of the mythological astronomy is only introduced here with the view of making Mina, the admitted head of a dynasty, a connecting link with the divine dynasties which also are astronomically dated, but have been assumed to be fabulous. It is certain that the dynasty of Mina coincides with the establishment of an Osirian myth that is forever connected with the sun in the sign of the bull by means of the legend relating to the death of Osiris when the sun was in Scorpio, and the bull and the scorpion. 1 Birch, History of Egypt, pp. 24, 25. Egypt. 39. Were the two equinoctial signs, showing that the bull of Mina and Osiris are one and the same. Now in the Egyptian zodiac 1 the crocodile is in Scorpio, so to say, that is, it occupies the whole 3 decans of that sign, and it was under the Osirian dynasty of deities that the crocodile was transformed into an image of evil and a symbol of Typho to be trampled underfoot. This does not in the least destroy the personality of Mina, because the pharaohs of Egypt were assimilated to the divinity, and monuments were raised and temples built to their own name, in honor of the deity whose name they bore. The divine, not the human, was the object of the worship. In the present instance it is the divine, the solar Mina or bull that makes it possible to account for the various menas in different countries, and gives us a common starting point for the Manu who was the lawgiver in India, Minos, who was lawgiver in Greece, Men W, who was the lawgiver to the Kimri, and Mina, who was lawgiver to Egypt. The law first given in each case was that of time and period. Mina, as the bull who in Egyptian mythology, as Kem, is the bull of the mother, is one with the Minos whose wife was Pasiphae, and this gives a natural interpretation to her passion for the bull. Mina is the head of the Thinite dynasty reigning at Memphis, and Thinis is in Upper Egypt. May not Tini and the Thinites derive their name in the same way from the new point of departure in the bull? The highest functionaries of the blood royal were distinguished by the style of princes of Tini. 10 is the division, the place of the Tenu or equinoctial eclipses, and also means to fill up, complete, terminate, and determine. The district in which Memphis stood was called Sekhet Ra, the field of the sun. Mina is accredited with having built Memphis, and one of its names is Makata, the land of the scales. Or as Maka equally applies to the equinox, from which the zodiacal scales were named, this may be equinoctial, and as the name of Mina is that of the bull Menevis, there is nothing incredible in supposing that Mina of Makata represents the sun, or vernal Kalur in the sign of the bull. The Arab name of telephone Manef for Memphis points to its being Menpa, the house or sign of the bull. King Teta, who follows the name of Mina, built the pyramid of the bull at Kakima, the town or shrine of the bull. It is probable that this step pyramid of Saqqara was the common grave or shrine of the dead bulls, to judge from its bones of bulls and the inscriptions relating to the royal APIs, the bull of that time being the representative of the sun instead of the later pharaoh. The builder of the bull pyramid would enable us, if need were, to do without the human mina. In Egyptian symbolry, the celestial is primordial and continually contains the clue to the terrestrial. The earthly is but the image of the heavenly. Thus the time of Mina is none the less real, and is all the more verifiable if astronomically dated. In Egypt the only fixed or definite 1 Drummond, as Dipus Judaicus, Pi. 2. 40a Book of the Beginnings. Era was astronomical. All the reports show that prior to the period identified with the name of Mina, the Egyptians reckoned vast lengths of time as reigns, of some kind, sacred to monarchs left without human name, because representative of the divinities, and beyond these was the direct dominion of the gods. These last reigns are mythical, but not therefore fabulous in the modern sense. The truth is that a great deal of history and mythology have to change places with each other. The history has to be resolved into myth, whilst the myths will be found to contain the only history. The ancient fables were veiled facts, and when we can get no further records on the earth, it is in the heavens we must seek for the Egyptian chronology. It is the astronomical mythology solely that will reveal to us what the Egyptians and other nations meant by dynasties of deities and the development of series and succession in their rule. It was by astronomical numbers that the Chaldeans reckoned the age of their sacred books. 1 inch in Egypt, if anywhere, says Diodorus, 2 inches the most accurate observations of the positions and movements of the stars have been made. Of each of these they have records extending over an incredible series of years. They have also accurately observed the courses and positions of the planets, and can truly predict eclipses of the sun and moon. Diogenes Laertius states that they possessed observations of 373 solar eclipses and 832 lunar. These were probably total or almost total. The Egyptians spanned spaces so vast that nothing short of astronomical cycles could be the measure and record of time and period for them. Plato, who spent some 13 years in Egypt trying to get into the penetralia of their knowledge, reports that they had divine hymns or songs worthy of the deity which were held in round numbers to be 10,000 years old. He tells us that he does not speak figuratively, but that they are real and credible figures. 3. The authorship of these was assigned to the great mother Isis. These figures are not to be utilized forthwith or straightway. That can only be done by going round to work, when we shall see that such hymns probably dated from the time when the sun was in the sign of Virgo Isis at the spring equinox. When Plato wrote, the colure of the vernal equinox was coincident with the sign of Aries, and the time was just over 10,000 years since it left the sign of Virgo. Previous to the reign of Mina, the Papyrus of Turin, and other documents assign a period of 5,613 years to 23 reigns. 4. These of course are not mortal reigns. They are identified with the Shu Zenhar, the followers, servants, or worshippers of Horus. A period of 13,420 years is also assigned to the Shu Zenhar. 19 Han are likewise mentioned. The Han is a cycle, and one dyad. Siculus, E. 113. 2b. I. P. 81. 3 leg, E. 657. 4 to rug pound, 6 premiers dynasties, P. 163. Egypt. 4i. These were probably cycles of Anup Sothis, the dog star, whose period was 1,461 years, 19 of which make a total of 27,759 years. 2 dynasties of gods and demigods were collected from the temple records and rectified by Lepsius I from the various Greek chronological writers. These begin with Ptah, Hephaestos, and end with Vitus. Of these, Ptah reigned 9,000 years, Helios 1,000, Agathodimon 700, Cronus Seb 500 inches Osiris 400, Typhon 350 Horus 1,800 inches Vitus 70, 13,820. After this, says Eusebius, 2 inches came a series of reigns down to Vitus during 13,900 years. Meaning the above list ending with Horus. It is clear that Vitus has no business to be in the list of divine rulers. Nor is it necessary to assume with Bunsen that 13,800 years of reigns imply hero worship in the modern sense.